when a new developer comes onto the team or an engineer, you have this key problem of how you manage the knowledge transfer to those people. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and what I have is what I want to talk a bit about is knowledge sharing, documentation, and then how you actually do that with an internal developer portal. Some of this is inspired by a book I've been reading called Software Engineering at Google. It has a number of chapters. These guys curated this, so it actually has authors for different chapters. And there are a couple of chapters in particular, one on knowledge sharing and another on documentation. And for the internal developer portal, I'm going to introduce you to a tool called Backstage. So firstly, knowledge sharing. Well, why do we have challenges with learning new things? There are lots of things that go on in an organization. One is people really don't want to ask questions because they appear foolish. They don't want to take a risk because they may make a mistake and get blamed for something if it goes wrong. And also across an organization, you have people who have developed expertise over a long period of time, and other people coming on board, they don't necessarily know where to find things. And you end up with the fragmentation of information, some duplication of information, which people reinventing the wheel because they actually don't know there already is a wheel. You have in any organisation some people who know so much that they become the go-to person for a given subject, and that's great until that person isn't available, either because they took some leave or they're overwhelmed with questions. And when you have that expert, often people don't bother learning themselves because they figure they can always go to the expert. So you get these situations where somebody either knows a lot about something or they know very little. And then if something has been figured out by a very smart person, then other people may just assume that it's always going to work and it's always going to work a certain way. So these are challenges that you have across an organisation, and the answer to it is to share knowledge. But the knowledge takes different forms. It can be personalised, which is the most powerful, but it also doesn't scale very well because you can't have one person talking to everybody in the organisation about their subject. Documenting that knowledge is certainly scalable, but it tends to have to be all drawn down to a common denominator, so it's often not specific to a particular person's problem. And then, of course, there's the tribal knowledge, which is things that aren't written down but are generally known across the team. So the way you scale your knowledge, group chats, mailing lists, a Q&A platform like Stack Overflow certainly has value, but it can be hard to manage that information or to find information that you're specifically looking for when you need it. Things like a Q&A platform like Stack Overflow are a really good resource, but sometimes the issue is just so complicated that you really need to find an expert anyway to explain it to you. And that's where the less scalable things like office hours and tech talks can come in. So in terms of documentation, one of the key things about documentation is it helps you to answer not just how something works, but why certain decisions were made. So when you look at how you document things, and it's always a challenge to maintain documentation, also think about why it came to be that way, because the person who designed it had some trade-offs to make, and if you don't explain the reasons for that, then you get this problem of parroting. Oh, we've always done it this way, so it must be right. The benefits, well, firstly, the simple act of writing something down helps you to clarify thoughts in your mind as to how it can work. It provides a record of what works and what doesn't. It makes you look more professional. If your documentation looks good, then people will look at that and say, oh, that must be a good system, I'm going to use that. So you should put as much effort into your documentation as you do into the code. And also it can help reduce the amount of questions you get asked about your code. Speaking of documentation like code, the challenge with much documentation is that it gets produced and then not reviewed or not updated. And this is really why you should treat documentation like code, and you should check it in, you should review it, much the same way that you do with code. Track issues. And the people who need to use documentation are usually the new people who come into the team. They're actually really good people to get to write and correct documentation, because some things might have gone out of date, the environments may have changed and the documentation isn't real. Well, when those new people come in and they try to follow it, they will often come across those problems. So having a path for them to either make corrections directly or to request fixes to the documentation is important. So the different types of documentation. The reference documentation about how the code works. The design documents that document your decisions, that help you with your plan, and also make it clear why certain things were done. Tutorials are always good. Sometimes issues are just so complex that you need to describe the concept of things. And conceptual documentation is probably the hardest to write, because it really takes a lot of effort to distill something very complex into something simple that people can understand. Landing pages are a good start for people to go to first. They shouldn't have too much information in them. They're really a place for people to find the key things that they need to know right now, and links to other resources. So with that, I want to talk about what a developer portal, the benefits of having a developer portal that has some of these components in it. Well, to the people who are managing the team, they're really keen on maintaining standards across the organisation. If somebody has figured out the best practice, they want to be able to have the entire team follow that best practice, and not a multitude of different ways. For developers, it should help you to create a new environment that incorporates all those best practices quite easily. For the platform engineers who are maintaining it, they should know where everything is, and also make sure that they can bring in new tools and incorporate them into the whole platform. So this is, we started the conversation talking about how you actually make all your applications resilient and are able to manage them. Documentation is an important part of that. But the reason why Backstage as a developer portal has become popular is because it incorporates not just static documents, but also gives that view into how you create a new environment. It was developed by Spotify and then open source. It's now under the Cloud Native Computing Project. And just a quick look at this. It contains things like a software catalog. So listing all your APIs, all your microservices, models, and so on. It has templates for how you create a new instance of a type of application. You're building a Node.js project, then the organisation you're with wants it done a certain way with certain components to it and certain styles, well, you can encourage that by creating a template that people can use to replicate new environments. And documents, and it can also be extended with plugins for new components that the people who wrote Backstage didn't think of. So I'm going to flip now to see if I can show you a quick demo of this. So this is an environment that's running out on the cloud. This is the, I'm going to annotate this a little bit. So we're on the landing page here, and we're listing some key sets of tools. These are all clickable links. The catalog itself is listed here, different APIs and documentation. Yeah. So if I want to look at certain tools, I can go across to there, and it will take me there. I'm not going to click too far on that. The software catalog itself. This consists of a set of YAML files. So it's in a markdown language. So when you document things, you can create these documents that help you to understand. You use the YAML markup language to provide a view that can be rendered on the page here. So you can see that it shows the relationships between different components in the catalog. Similarly with APIs, you can document the APIs there. And documents are more straight sort of documents, but again, written in YAML. So this is what I wanted to share with you as a good idea about how you can better manage your components. I'm still learning a little bit more about Backstage. I think that it's great for documentation, but I think the hard part is using the plugins to actually connect to your environments to see, because you have information about the different tools in lots of different places. But this is a way that you can help to draw that together. So what in this broad brush I shared with you some of the things that we really want to promote in our organisation about knowledge sharing, how you go about thinking about documentation and its benefits, and why it's important to manage it, and then shared a tool. So that's pretty much all I have for you. I want to mention again API Days and more information about that, but also the Engineers Super User Program. There are plenty of F5 people here who can talk to you about being involved in that. Thank you very much.
John, you have a question?
Yes, Jim.
So on the documentation where EPI, do you use like OpenStack or
Yeah, it incorporates the Open API specification. Right. So let me see if I've got still setting this up. So I'm not sure if I had a great example, but I think this is an example of I just wanted to show the Open API specification, but you can, but it can draw in the information. In an Open API specification, you have several sections to it because you have information that's sort of human readable about what version of the Open API spec it is, and then you have information about the system and what the URL is for the API, and then you have more information about the paths and the examples and responses. So you can drill down to those. I don't have a good example on here, but that is certainly a part of that value of being able to see that. Just looking at an Open API specification is a bit of a dry read, and anything you can do to make it a little bit more graphical and readable as well. Okay.
Just one question. Yeah. So like this is
is in front of, let's say, the F5 distributed document,
It's,
layer of the abstract.
it's more of a documentation type of
Just
layer.
documentation.
I called it it's called an internal developer portal as opposed to an internal developer platform. A platform would include not just the documentation but the controls around and monitoring platform. So I think Backstage is good at that sort of documentation level and being able to understand where everything is. Actually controlling it, I still think relies on a number of tools that you described earlier, things like provisioning and things like that.
But along that same question, one possibility is because we are able to export OpenStack based on the APIs that we learned from the network
Yeah.
as an API gateway. So we can export that out as OpenStack and then import into your operation.
Yeah.
Becomes your API gateway.
Right, and I think that's the beauty of having this catalog from several different sources. Right. It can also link to a GitHub organizational repo, so you can draw in those things without having to copy and paste a lot of things. You link things, and there are plugins. I'll just go to the Backstage documentation. So it does list several plugins that are already standard. If we look at the plugins, it has existing plugins. So there are plugins already for the different tools. Circle CI, Jenkins, and GitHub, Sentry, other monitoring platforms. So these plugins help to extend Backstage, and so you can start to draw more of that information into it, without rewriting everything. I think that's to your point.
What are your thoughts on some of the recent data breaches happened recently with APIs that are not authenticated or the APIs that expose unintentionally?
Well, I know you guys talk about the OWASP top 10 a lot, and unfortunately it's misconfiguration of the authentication authorization is a key part of it. And I know I had a couple of webinars with the F5 team in India where they've been talking about this, and the recent Optus data breach, just they shouldn't have had that API connected to that environment. It should not have been possible. So unfortunately, it's the basics of going through the configuration and making sure that it's right, and making sure that it's locked down and secure. Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to thank Sharon and the F5 team for hosting us this evening. We have recorded this, so we'll put the recording on YouTube, and we'll announce that soon, and we'll let you know when the next meetup is. And feel free to have whatever's left of the food and the giveaways.
Thank you so much.